morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, out of Voice of Radio. So today, I'm going to be showing you what I think I can comfortably call the weirdest mill deck that I have seen in quite some time. And I speak as a guy who looks at a lot of deck lists, is pretty much always looking for deck lists. And I've not seen a mill deck like this. Bits of it will look familiar, but the fact that this video has started with a Dragonite on the screen should basically tell you what you need to know about this being a weirder mill deck. I know, right? Now, some of the parts of this deck are going to look extremely familiar. This is still a mill deck that is very much built around Oranguru. This is the Oranguru that came around in Ultra Prism, and it's got the attack resource management, which lets you grab 3 cards from your discard pile and put them on the bottom of your deck. It cycles your resources around. Life is looking fairly good. Cool. We also play a couple of Zacian. That is mostly played the ability really here, given that we're not playing enough energy to actually attack with it. It just lets you draw 3 cards and end your turn. If there were any metal energy, you could then attach them to Zacian, but we're not playing any metal energy, so there definitely won't be. You really are just using it to draw 3 cards and then it ends your turn, but, you know, that's alright. That's a good use for it. And we play one of the Oranguru from Sword and Shield that lets you swap the top card of your deck with one of the cards in your hand. So far, so normal. This is what we would expect. Now, we do play 2 copies of the Mew from Unbroken Bonds. Now, this does have an attack for 1 colorless energy that just drops 3 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. Can be useful if your opponent goes like Super Aggro Spiritomb or something like that. But mostly it's here for the ability to protect your bench from bench damage, stops your opponent KOing everything in one go. Bearing in mind Salamence is out now, which does 30 damage to everything. That would run through a deck like this moderately quickly, if I'm honest with you, ladies and gentlemen. And we play 2 there because remember, mill decks don't take prizes, so we play a couple, so if one is prized, it's not the end of the world. And we see the combination of Magcargo and Mewtwo. Or Mewtwo and Mew. Now, we've seen this in mill decks before. It's not in every mill deck, but we do see it. It's really played for Magcargo's GX attack here that discards the top 5 cards of your opponent's deck for just 1 fire energy. And the reason we play Mewtwo and Mew here is because Mewtwo and Mew is a basic and Magcargo GX is not. So essentially what you do is you discard Magcargo, it can then be copied with Mewtwo and Mew, and then you attach the fire energy to Mewtwo and Mew to copy this attack if you need to. I.e. if discarding 5 cards on the top of your opponent's deck is going to get you closer to winning. So that's slightly unusual. We then go to 4 copies of Marip. Now this is moderately unusual outside of Japan. It is not the least bit unusual in Japan. The mill decks in Japan generally have been going towards Marip for a little while now. I'm still not seeing that so much in the UK, US, Europe, etc. I'm seeing a bunch of really good mill disruption, call them what you will, decks that aren't playing Marip. I mean, the only one that made it into the Limitless TCG Invitational, which was Chip Ritchie, did not play Marip. It's not a standard thing here, it is in Japan. You see, when Marip is in the active, you can just put your opponent's active Pokemon to sleep. Oh, that's it. You just put them to sleep. And then, of course, we need to go slightly out of order because Slumbering Forest becomes extremely important here. Slumbering Forest is a stadium card whereby if you're asleep between turns, you've got to flip 2 coins and both of them have to be heads in order to wake up. Which means you put Marip in the active, and there is then a 75% chance that your opponent is not going to be able to attack, retreat, etc. next turn. That's kind of ridiculous. And this is what you do for a lot of the game. Marip will be your active Pokemon for a lot of the game here. You just leave it active, you make your opponent asleep, and then you sit there milling their cards, etc. It's kind of ridiculous, and it's kind of awesome. But it is very standard in Japan, it's just not been outside. And that's where things start getting a little bit weirder. We see a copy of Ipom. Now this Ipom actually came out in the Pikachu and Zekrom League Battle deck, which is kind of weird that it ended up in there of all places. But essentially, it's got an attack for a colourless energy that lets you discard random cards from your opponent's hand until they only have 5 cards left in their hand. So if your opponent is unable to get much going, if they're just keeping cards in their hand because they're asleep and because they're trying to build up one thing, which often happens against Mill, you don't play everything, you try and build up one Pokemon to sweep or whatever, then all of a sudden in comes Ipom and just discards, 20 cards from your hand, and at that point it's basically over, which is not a good thing. Unless you're playing against it, in which case it's a very good thing. And then we see Dragonite. There are 2 copies of Dragonite here, and Dragonite is a legitimate part of this deck. You see, what Dragonite does, it's got the ability Fast Call. Once during your turn, you may search your deck for a supporter card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. So what you're basically doing here is just searching out all of your supporters. Hang on a second, Wassy, how can you play a Stage 2 Dragonite? Because of Lance. This deck plays Lance Prism Star, and Lance Prism Star, if one of your Pokemon was knocked out during your opponent's last turn, lets you search your deck for 2 Dragon Pokemon and put them straight onto your bench. So if you can get this in hand and your opponent takes a prize, then you can just search out both your Dragonite, whack them on the bench, and for the rest of the game you're going to have whatever 2 supporters you like every single turn. Bearing in mind, your opponent is going to be asleep the vast majority of the time. This is kind of nuts. Now in terms of the energy line here, we play 4 copies of Capture Energy. Doesn't really matter what energy you're using, the vast majority of what you need is colourless. This at least will get a basic Pokemon out. We play 4 copies of Speed Energy. When you attach it to a lightning Pokemon, you get to draw 2 cards. No, you're not really looking to attack with Marip, but you are going to be needing to retreat it occasionally, and it has a retreat cost of 1. Plus it is a lightning Pokemon, so essentially this is just there to help out Marip. And then we've got a copy of Fire Energy, because remember we need to use Makago's GX attack. That's fairly important. Now, in terms of trainer cards, we've already mentioned Slumbering Forest. It's pretty important. But really, it is the supporter cards here because of the whole Dragonite thing. Now, one of the things we're doing here is we're playing a full 4 copies of Lieutenant Surge's strategy. That's the one that just lets you play 3 supporters, including itself, during your turn. Essentially, you have 1 supporter in hand, you search out Lieutenant Surge and another with Dragonite, and oh look, now you can play them. If you're going to be searching multiple supporters every turn, it's going to be better if you can play multiple supporters every turn. Although along similar lines, we do actually play a little bit of Misty's Favour here, because it just lets you search your deck for 3 supporter cards and put them into your hand. Especially in the early game, being able to fill your hand up with supporters that you can then use once you start drawing into your Surge, that's pretty good. But what supporters are we generally using here? I mean, the main one is Belelba and Bryson Man. This is a full-on mill deck. This is a deck that aims to win by discarding cards from your opponent's deck so that they essentially have no cards left, and if they can't draw a card at the beginning of their turn, they lose. Your Pokemon aren't milling here, but between things like Dragonite searching out and Lieutenant Surge allowing multiples, you play lots of Belelba and Bryson Man. It's kind of ridiculous, ladies and gentlemen. Now, we do also see a copy of Faber here, which can be used to Lost Zone, Special Energy, Stadiums and Tools. But we also see Cynthia and Caitlin. What does Cynthia and Caitlin do? I mean, it draws 3 cards, but it gets a supporter card from your discard pile into your hand. Bearing in mind, if you play Lieutenant Surge and then Cynthia and Caitlin, you can grab a Belelba and Bryson Man and then play it immediately. which is kind of a ridiculous advantage here. And then we do play a full 4 copies of Pal Pad. It gets 2 supporters from your discard pile back into your deck. And bearing in mind this deck is built around getting your supporters back constantly and playing multiples, clearly something like Pal Pad is going to be extremely useful here. We do also see a couple copies of Birdkeeper. It is a switch plus draw 3 cards. You need to make sure you got the right Pokemon in the active, etc. And it draws cards, so that's kind of nice. It's not the main part of the deck, but it's nice to have it there. Outside of that, we've just got 4 copies of Quick Ball to get your basics out. Although don't forget Capture Energy will help out a lot as well. We've got 1 copy of Ordinary Rod to recover basic energy and Pokemon. Any Pokemon, not just basics. Although the only evolutions you're playing are Dragonite and Macargo, and you're unlikely to want to recover them very often. And then 4 copies of Lily's Pokédoll, because when Lily's Pokédoll is in the active and gets KO'd, you don't give up no prizes. So it basically forces your opponent to go to the effort of getting a KO without taking a prize. You'd rather not use this, you'd rather have Marip putting your opponent to sleep, but it's great to buy time if you don't have a Marip in the active. I started this video telling you that this was the weirdest mill deck I'd seen in a long time, and I stand by that assessment. It is strange and odd, and it plays Lance and a 2/2 Dragonite line, but what this does more than any others is this really, really aggressively goes for Belelba and Bryson Man. And a lot of the time, that is going to be all it takes to win the game. When you then add in Marip putting them to sleep, and every turn they're asleep and you're milling cards, makes it less and less likely that they're going to eventually draw out of it. Make no mistake, this could be absolutely brilliant. And given that it did make top 16 at the biggest tournament in Japan, their unofficial national championships, I think it is something that we need to start taking kind of seriously, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, when I say made top 16, I actually mean made top 8 and got knocked out by one of the Vikavolt that made the final. Still, top 8 is pretty gosh darn good. So that's the deck, ladies and gentlemen, but I'd like to know what you think about it. I'd like to know if you're taking it seriously. So let me know in the comment section, would you? Go nuts, be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWasi, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.